Saw X well and truly marks the spot. I am just back from seeing the 10th film in the Saw franchise. Well, kind of the 10th film. The first 8 films are sitting over here, and then Spiral's just kind of floating out here on its own. But either way, I thought I would give you my thoughts while they are still fresh in my mind. Now, this will be a spoiler-free review, but I will still touch on things like basic plot details, past Saw films, and some of the information that has come across through the trailers and other advertising. So if you do want to see the film with no prior knowledge, head on out right now, then you can come right back here and we can compare thoughts. Now, a bit of context, I am a sucker for a Saw film. The first one always stood out to me for its simple but super effective concept, and the surprise reveal cemented it as one of my absolute favorite thriller horror films growing up. Now, while the sequels have strayed a little from the original, steering more into the gore, torture porn aspects of the traps themselves, it has always maintained a sense of mystery at its core. Now, this was always the appeal for me, and as much criticism as the complicated, changing timelines of the film receive, it has always been really good at planting seeds that audiences have to return 2 or 3 films down the line in order for that big payoff, which is a brilliant marketing ploy that has become a staple of cinematic universes these days, but one that in a franchise that is all mystery really means that much more when those reveals do happen. Now, rewatching the 9 preceding films recently, I wouldn't say there were any that I disliked entirely, but there is a very big difference from the top of the list to the very bottom, and I am super pleased to say that Saw X is on the higher end of that scale. Now, taking place shortly after the events of the first Saw film, this plot centers on John Kramer heading to Mexico to undergo an experimental surgery to cure his brain cancer. When this miracle treatment is proved to be an elaborate scam, he goes full jigsaw on those who took advantage of the hope of a dying man. Now, the biggest strength of this film is how prominent Tobin Bell's character is. Acting only in a minor role for the first film, the character of John Kramer has risen in popularity and become the most compelling part of the franchise. Now, many would argue, myself included, that the franchise did somewhat shoot itself in the foot when they killed off his character all the way back in Saw 3. And though they've done their best to incorporate his character through flashbacks in the later films, it was clear that they were kind of running out of ways to shoehorn him into those films. I believe that in the final chapter he only appears for a mere 3 minutes of screen time. But I am happy to say he is back though, and better than ever. The choice to not only set the film in a time where John Kramer is still kicking, but to put him front and center in the leading role was a masterstroke. Tobin Bell delivers his best performance to date as the infamous Jigsaw Killer, and is given the time to give a real sense of humanity to John as well, and emphasize the heartbreak of his struggles with terminal illness. Now, he's not the only solid performance in the film, with the return of Shawnee Smith's Amanda, another character that's always been pretty positively received in the franchise. I personally have had mixed feelings about her. I guess her erratic behavior and inability to follow John's instructions and learn the lessons that he's trying to teach her has made her a little bit tricky to root for at the best of times, but I think this film does a really good job of painting her in a much more sympathetic light. Now, the victims of the film, I guess you would call them, but I do use that term very loosely. They're significantly stronger than some of the ones that we have previously seen in Saw films. This franchise is no stranger to cheesy acting performances, and while this film isn't perfect in that regard, I would say the combination of stronger writing and just some really solid performances makes for some very compelling scenes. Obviously, it's hard to imagine the peril that they're put in, so to give a very convincing portrayal of that through acting must be a very tricky task, and I would say that these guys do an outstanding job of that particular aspect of the film. Standout for me was definitely the character of Cecilia though, who is the mastermind behind the whole operation. Another recognizable aspect of these Saw films is the cinematography. So both Jigsaw and Spiral departed from the recognizable editing style, color palettes, and aspect ratio of the previous films, and as a result they felt a little bit disjointed from the others. So this film is a return to the gritty look and feel of the earlier films, but shows that this style can be incorporated with really sophisticated dynamic camera movement and clever visual storytelling that at times is just genuinely beautiful to watch. Now that's not something you would usually hear about a film that's showing people getting torn apart and blood splurting all over the place, but there are just genuinely some really awesome shots. Though the mystery elements of these Saw films are probably my favourite aspect, I would say that this film has maybe the least amount of surprising plot twists and turns. That's not to say that they aren't present at all, but knowing that you are 10 films in, these twists can start to become a little bit formulaic, so I really do commend the choice not to rely too heavily on them, and instead subvert expectations in the way the story's told instead. This was a real strength for me, especially in all the time it takes at the beginning of the film to establish characters before the game begins. It is by far the most time that they've devoted to that, and the game, I reckon, is about halfway through the film before it even starts. This film is much more than just the game itself, and as someone who really isn't watching the Saw films for the gore aspects, I really appreciated that. Now that being said, if you are here for the blood, you will not be disappointed. Some of the most creative traps in a very long time, and the personal touches to link the traps to the narrative were a particularly awesome aspect of it for me. There is one early on in the film that gives an insight into how John kind of comes up with his ideas, and that's one that I particularly enjoyed. This was a different kind of trap though, and I'm very eager to see how it's received by people. Think it's cool that they've gone in a different way, or whether that's kind of... look, I won't go into it, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Finally, when it comes to the traps, there was something towards the end of the film that we have never ever seen before, and while the outcome may have been predictable, it was still very cool to kind of see it play out, and it is kind of surprising in hindsight to think that they've never tried something like this before. I'm really keen to see how the film goes and what the future holds for the franchise. I personally would love to see more from this time period, bring on more John Kramer, maybe even some other familiar faces. I think in an era that is capitalizing on fan service, the film was very restrained, which was just super refreshing, but it also means it can be appreciated by longtime fans or newcomers to the franchise as well. So super keen to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This is my first kind of review in this format, but if you'd like to see more, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for plenty of other movie-based content.